How do we know what we know about turfgrass science? Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Turfgrass Epistemology. I'm Travis Shaddix. Thank you all for letting me know quickly that there was no volume. Yeah, I'm halfway out of it. My daughter has the flu, and I think I'm going to cut something, so I'm a little bit slow tonight. I'm slow every day. Imagine if I'm sick. But thank you for letting me know. I'd have been here for 15 minutes talking and didn't know it was on. But anyway, it's middle of March, and grass is growing. Grass is green. I cut my lawn and put out some fertilizer a day or two ago. I'll be putting out a video in the next, this week or next week, on a little bit of fertilizer that I opened up after storing it for 30 years. That's right. That's what I said. Stored it for 30 years, and then I opened up the bag, and there'll be a video out about what that looks like after being stored for 30 years. So anyway, we're going to go over tonight in this episode the influence of organic fertilizers on dollar spot. There was a comment made. It's probably been a year ago. It was on one of the comment shows, and I actually addressed it in one of the comment shows, and it said something along the lines of, I use organic fertilizer on my greens, and I notice less disease on my greens, or something like that. What are my thoughts on organic nitrogen sources and its influence on diseases and things like that? So tonight we'll be going over that. And this is a really good article, and they do a pretty good literature review too. So we're going to see what the prior scholars in this field found, as well as the one tonight. And it's a good article. So we're going to be looking at, do natural organic nitrogen sources actually have an influence on diseases? And they also have quality in here, and they have thatch, they have organic matter. I think that's about it in here. They don't have any. There was a question in the chat earlier. Where was it? Oh, here it is. By Shawnee. It says, is there a link in the paper? I'm curious if there's a measurement of phosphorus levels during the study with organic fertilizer. Shawnee, I don't think there is in tonight. I'm pretty sure there's not one in tonight's paper for phosphorus, but I will get into it. Yeah, I don't remember. Teed Up 78 says, had a great time in Providence at the New England conference. Yeah, I'm glad you had a good time. Yeah, that's a pretty good conference up there. It's bigger. It's deceptively large. There's quite a few people at that conference. And I've spoken at it, I guess, 3 times, I suppose. Once during COVID. Actually, I think maybe, I don't remember. Once in person, and then a couple times, I think, online. I don't remember now. But yeah, that's a good conference. That reminds me, if those people who might be interested in bringing me in to speak, several people have already reached out to me. I'm just letting those, that if for some reason you're interested in having myself come in and talk at your conference in the fall, I would get a hold of me early, because it's already getting booked up. So December's already booked up. If you've already talked to me and confirmed with me, then I have you on the calendar. But if you haven't at this point, in this March 10th, 2026, then December's gone. November still has a week or two available. In October, the last week in October, it looks like it's booked. So, and then there's a week in September that's booked. So if you're contemplating talking to your board members or whatever, having me come in and talk at a turf conference or whatever the case might be, if you want me to be there, you might want to get a hold of me sooner than later. Just letting you know. Since I've been doing the show online, I've been getting more and more requests to come and speak. And that's a great thing. That's fantastic. But I feel bad telling people I can't make it. It makes it sound like I'm some sort of, hugely sought after speaker. I'm not particularly, but it just happens to be that all the talks happen to be at the same time of the year. And that's like from November to maybe early February. So get a hold of me soon if that's what you want to look into. On that note, you can go to my website at Turfgrass Epistemology, and you can book some time with me there if you want to. I've been getting a lot of purchases on the courses lately, and you can find those here at courses. Just go to courses and click online courses. And here's the courses there's one course available now. This has 3 lectures in it called Soil and Soil Origins. And we talk all about classification and soil formation. These are general soils courses that I would teach at an academic level, at a college class. These are the lectures I would teach at a college class. There's no difference. Just pulling back the curtain. These are the exact same thing. So you're just not paying thousands of dollars for an entire semester, and you're not having to go every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So, you're getting these lectures as you want. When you purchase them, you have lifetime access. And my goal, come hell or high water, is to get these other 3 courses finished before Thanksgiving. I'm confident I can do it. It's just I have so many other irons in the fire. I'm trying to figure out where to get time to do it, but I will find time. And those are things like soil physical properties, soil biological properties, and soil chemical properties. And I imagine these are a lot of what people are interested in hearing about, and seeing how you can get more information, just get more knowledge about your particular area, whether it's gardening or home lawns or golf courses or sod production or growing tomatoes or whatever it is. All of this information is pertinent and relevant to your interests, and so that you can go to Turfgrass Epistemology and get this course right now, and then I'll release these other courses as they become available. There's been a lot of people interested in that, so I'm glad to see that there seems to be an interest in learning more in depth, having more in depth knowledge on these particular areas, because it's not those aren't YouTube shows. It's really more book lectures, content lectures, explanations of content, and things like that. Okay. For those music aficionados, you've tuned in on a special night, okay? There was, throughout history in the last, let's pick a date, 100 years or so, there's been certain progressions. Like science, like music, like science, progression doesn't happen 20% at a time usually. It happens in small increments. We progress 0.1% at a time, But every now and then the Beatles show up. Ozzy Osbourne shows up. Black Sabbath shows up. Every now and then Led Zeppelin shows up. All right. There's several of them. Pink Floyd and Guns N' Roses. And, there's several bands that have really moved the music forward. In the world of heavy metal, particularly in the world of heavy metal / death metal, there hasn't really been a lot of progression since the mid-90s, maybe. There's not a whole lot of progression. It's sort of the same thing over and over. And I'm big on outside the box ideas. I'm, taking a chance, trying something new, and seeing how that moves our particular discipline forward. As you can see, I think this channel probably falls into that box, Turfgrass Epistemology. We're doing things on this channel that nobody else is doing. And even if it's minor, even if it's small fractions, I think this channel is showing how we can teach critical thinking skills and do it in a way that captivates the audience and encourages people to change their behaviors by using these particular skills that we're teaching on this channel. So I would categorize this channel as possibly being in that category. Well, there's one musician who came out of nowhere 3 weeks ago. Nobody knew who this lady was. She came out of nowhere about 3-4 weeks ago. And I am becoming convinced, after listening to several of her pieces, that she may be the catalyst to move heavy metal forward, even if it's just a little bit. And tonight at the end of the show, I'm going to maybe introduce the channel, the listeners, to this particular artist. She is like, I've never heard anybody like her. And you may not like it, and that's fine. But I just think that she has the potential to move the industry forward, the music industry and heavy metal, particularly death metal, forward a great deal. So stay tuned to the end of the show if you're interested in music and heavy metal. I suspect there's been a handful of people that have already heard her, but if you haven't, you'll hear her at the end of the show tonight. Okay. Let's get into the show. It's Yeah, well, T up 78 says, "Oh, you were at all my shows. You were at all my talks in the fall last year." Yeah. And then you say, "That's awesome, Dr. Shaddix. Wish these were around back in 1996 when I went to UMass Stockbridge School of Agriculture." Oh, yeah, yeah. I've had a couple people from universities, professors and students, contact me about the lectures and the courses and the show that I'm doing now. And so I don't know where I'm going with that. It seems like there's an interest in pursuing this path of education, not just teaching cation exchange capacity, and this is how it arises, and organic matter, and this is where it comes from, this is how it influences nutrients. And it's rather than just teaching, this is what you need to know, teaching it in an epistemological approach about how do we actually know this, get the students to actually start thinking about it, get the professors to start thinking about, well, how do we actually know this is true? Where do we get this knowledge from? And pursuing those questions, because that sort of thought process can be used in any part of your life. Okay. Thank you for the kind comment. Tee it up. Appreciate it. Let's get into the article. It's a rather long article, but it's extremely good. And I'm going to do my best to do it justice. We've been going over diseases, and this particular article is entitled Spot Severity, Tissue Nitrogen, and Soil Microbial Activity in Bentgrass as Influenced by Nitrogen Source by Davis and Durnadin. So this was in 2002, and this was published in our top-tier journal, Crop Science. So we've been talking about diseases, a lot about spot. And like I said, there was a comment made, I guess it was probably a year ago, and I did ask the question on one of my comments show from a listener and said, well, the superintendent said, well, we see less disease when we use organic nitrogen sources on our putting greens. Is there any truth to that? So we're going to go over that tonight and see what Davis and Durnadin found in their study. There is increasing interest in the use of natural or bioorganic nitrogen sources and soil amendments for use on turf grasses. Several natural fertilizers are good nitrogen sources, and their use has been linked to suppressing turfgrass diseases. The mechanism for disease suppression by natural organic fertilizers may be due in part to their effect on increasing soil microbial activity. Increased microbial activity in soil presumably diminishes the activity of plant pathogens by antagonizing, parasitizing, or competing with pathogens. You will hear this by virtually every natural organic fertilizer salesman in the turf industry. Natural organic fertilizers are going to reduce nematodes. They're going to reduce disease occurrence and spot, and they're going to cure all the problems that you have. Natural organic fertilizers as a nitrogen source or a phosphorus source are A-okay with me. There is ample evidence to indicate that the proper application of these products will result in perfectly good-looking turfgrass. All these other claims are highly questionable. And so that's what they're going to look at today. The severity of spot, pythium damping off, and root rot, and necrotic ring spot have been reduced following applications of various organic fertilizers and compost. Now, if I do have one bone to pick with this article, is that, okay, they make that statement and they have all these citations, but the only particularly valid citation in this list is this Markland paper or is it Markland in 1969? Or the Landshut paper. But some of these are just like bulletins or whatever. They're not refereed papers per se. In other words, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, they have 7 or 8 papers to support that statement, but many of those are not refereed, and some of those don't even say that in the papers. They actually say the opposite. So there is one paper in there that supports that statement, but most of them don't support it. And then the rest of the literature we were going to go over right now will actually they'll make that statement. They'll identify that is a limitation, but it's strange that they say it there. But anyway, several researchers reported significant reductions in spot severity following applications of milorganite and activated sewage sludge. So this Cook 64 paper and Landshut and McNitt 97 paper and the Markland 69 paper, there's some information in there, but it ain't that strong of a result. I'll be frank. Certainly it's conditional, but anyway. Sand top dressing amended with the Ringer Compost Plus Ringer Green Restore and Sustain, as well as selected compost prepared for from turkey litter and sewage sludge and non-composted blends of plant and animal meals also were reported to suppress dollar spots by Nelson and Kraft, and then in 91 and 92. But I'll scroll down here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. The Nelson and Kraft, I don't know if the Nelson and Kraft, Nelson and Kraft is right here, this 91 and 92, and you'll see it has, or maybe it wasn't the Nelson and Kraft. Okay, this one was in plant disease. Okay, this one was this Nelson and Kraft 92 was valid. But look at this other one. It says test controls plant. It's just a paper. I mean, it's just like a note or something in this particular one. And this is the same way. It just has one page, which meaning it's probably like an abstract or something. It's not a paper in the sense that we would have as much confidence in it. But nevertheless, they have that in there. Okay. Lou in 95 evaluated alginate, which was a Norwegian kelp meal, ammonium nitrate, Molorganite, Ringer Lawn Restore, Ringer Green Super, Ringer Turf Restore, and Sandade, which is a granular sea plant meal, sewage sludge, and sulfur-coated urea for management of dollar spot and creeping bentgrass in 1995. They reported that applications of Ringer fertilizers, ammonium nitrate, and sulfur-coated urea gave rise to significantly greater populations of microorganisms on turfgrass leaves and in the thatch and soil. They also reported that higher microbial populations associated with the use of certain organic fertilizer treatments may have been related to dollar spot suppression. The researchers, however, did not apply the amendments in fertilizers at a uniform rate. They applied it between 1 pound and 5 pounds of nitrogen per year, I guess. Consequently, the level of dollar spot suppression observed might have been the result of increased rates of nitrogen applications. So what they're saying is these researchers found this, but they didn't actually control for the confounding factor of nitrogen. Landshut and McNitt in 97 compared 5 natural organic fertilizers, urea and ureaform, for their effects on dollar spot suppression and creeping bentgrass. Their results showed that urea provided equal or better dollar spot suppression than the natural organic fertilizers. They also reported that on the majority of rating dates, dollar spot severity decreased as turf color improved, suggesting that as nitrogen availability increased, disease severity decreased. So the Landshut and McNitt paper is showing that it's probably just the nitrogen, because when they compared it with natural organics, it was the soluble nitrogen sources were equal to or better. Okay. Urea provided equal or better dollar spot control. So than the natural organics. So it's probably just nitrogen according to the Landshut and McNitt paper. Few studies have been designed to take into account the suppressive effects of nitrogen in microorganisms both together and independently. For example, Nelson and Kraft in 92 reported that dollar spot suppression in turf receiving certain compost was due to their effect on increasing microbial activity. Nelson and Kraft in 92, however, did not take into account the relationship between dollar spot and turf response to nitrogen, again, not accounting for the confounding factor of nitrogen. Landshut and McNitt in 97 suggested that improved turf growth in response to nitrogen, and as measured by turf color, could have reduced dollar spot severity, which we found to be the case in several papers. They did not, however, assess the possible effects of the fertilizer on soil microbial activity. Results from the Liu 1995 paper suggested that higher microbial populations associated with certain organic and inorganic fertilizer treatments may have been related to dollar spot suppression. Liu in 95, however, did not apply the amendments in fertilizers at a uniform nitrogen rate. So basically what the authors are saying is all these previous researchers have looked at this nitrogen effect, but they didn't account for the microbial effect, or they looked at the microbial effect and they didn't account for the nitrogen effect. They weren't looking at both. So they're setting up the stage as to explaining why they would why this is necessary to move science forward. So the primary objectives of this study were to evaluate 9 nitrogen sources and composts for their effects on dollar spot severity and turf quality. Other study objectives were as follows: to elucidate the relationship among nitrogen sources and the amount of nitrogen in foliar tissue, soil microbial activity, and severity of dollar spot, and 2, to evaluate the nitrogen sources for their impact on turf quality, thatch production, soil organic matter levels, and plant parasitic nematode population densities. So again, there's not a hypothesis in there, but I can always hold out hope. Maybe at some point the newer articles will keep coming out, and maybe there's more and more hypotheses actually stated in those in a falsifiable manner. I'll just keep saying the same thing over and over, and maybe we'll have an effect. Who knows? Um, so yeah, let's get into the how they did it, materials and methods, and then I'll go back to the chat and answer any questions you guys might have before I get into the results. An established stand of South Shore creeping bentgrass at the University of Maryland Cherry Hill Turfgrass Research Facility in Silver Springs was used as the study site. Soil was a sassafras sandy loam. I don't know what it is about sassafras that reminds me of Looney Tunes Saturday morning, because I know that the Looney Tunes would say suffer and succotash. What was it? Was it Sylvester the cat would say that? But sassafras is always so fun to say. Sassafras sandy loam. And then here's the fine, loamy, silicious, mesic, typic, haplodult. And this is what I'm saying in the courses online. If you want to know more about how to just explain or how to define and understand what that means, I have a course in there that explains what an ultisol is. And basically, an ultisol is generally a low fertility soil. It's sort of like an alpha sol, but without the fertility. If that makes sense, I don't know, but they generally be poor. These are essentially the entire state of Mississippi and Alabama, basically. Yeah, that's right. And up into Tennessee, and they're just really not great soils to grow any plants on. But that's what that means, ultisol. With a pH of 6.5 and organic matter of 2.8%. The soil phosphorus and potassium levels, phosphorus was 145 and potassium was 112. They don't mention the extracts or the depth, so it doesn't really do anything for me. I have no idea. This is what happens when I get soil test. Say, well, can you interpret this or can you help me with this? The answer is no, I cannot help you with your soil test. If I don't know the soil testing depth and I don't know the soil extract, then I have no idea how to interpret that. And this particular value says 145 parts per million of phosphorus, 145 kilograms per hectare of phosphorus. But that doesn't do anything to me or for me. I have no idea what that number means. You might go, well, 145, that's a lot. Well, yeah, if it's from 6 inches and it's from malic 3, yeah. But if it's from 12 inches and it's, Olson or something, I mean, it's, in other words, it's just, and we need more information. So please soil test it at a known depth, and then please provide the extract, or at least ask the lab what extract they're using. Malic 3 is probably the best one to use, unless the pH is like above 7.5 or 8. And if that's the case, then there's other things that are more appropriate. The nitrogen sources evaluated were urea, sulfur-coated urea, milorganite, sustained medium, which was a 524, Earthgrow 1881 Select, which was an 824, Earthgrow dehydrated manure, which was a 221, and Ringer Lawn Restore, which is a 1026. Oh, and then Compro 120, and Scott's All Natural Turf Builder, which is an 1124. So I'm going to describe what these are. Urea and sulfur-coated urea are synthetic organic nitrogen sources. Milorganite is an activated sewage sludge. And Compro is a composted sewage sludge. Okay, so this Compro is going to be one of the treatments that stands out. And it's a composted sewage sludge. So you can think of it a little bit like Milorganite, but it's been composted. Hasn't been dried and pelletized like Milorganite was. It's been composted. Sustained medium, Earthgrow 1881, Earthgrow dehydrated manure, and Ringer Lawn Restore, and Scott's All Natural Turf Builder are composed primarily of poultry waste materials. Not composted, just derived from poultry waste. The end sources were applied annually from 1994 to 2000 at a rate of 1 pound of nitrogen in October, 1 in November, December, and May. So 4 pounds of nitrogen per year. Okay, October, November, December, and May. I didn't realize somehow in this study, it says 1994 to 2000, but they don't show 6 years of data. Anyway, that's how they did it. Plots were not inoculated with dollar spot. A lot of times these studies where they inoculate the plot so they have uniformity of the disease and it's kind of easy to determine what effect. But in this case, they didn't inoculate it. They just did the study in locations that tended to be prone to dollar spot. Okay? The dollar spot severity, turf quality, and thatch depth and organic matter, how they do this. The plots were evaluated weekly for disease by counting the number of dollar spot infection centers. Dollar spots were used to calculate the relative area of the disease progress curve. The plots were evaluated weekly for turf quality, they did it from 0. So from 0 to 10, and 8 was the minimum acceptable quality on this particular putting green. That's how they did it. Thatch depth was evaluated by taking 5 cores from each plot, and the uncompressed thatch was measured using a ruler. Organic matter was determined by removing 15 soil cores from each soil plot in November 98 and March 1st and June 28th of 2000. The foliage and thatch were removed, and the amount of organic matter in the top inch, and then the 1 to 2 inch zones were determined by weight loss on ignition. Leaf tissue nitrogen was sampled every 2 weeks. That's fine. General soil microbial activity plots were sampled every 2 weeks between June and September, and then between May and June of 2000 to determine the general level of soil microbial activity. So for all those, salesmen out there that love to talk about soil microbial activity and how your product is going to change the world and increase soil microbial activity, well, they did it here for years, and we're going to see what they found. I'm sure their results are completely different than all the other results with soil microbial activity in your organic fertilizers. So we'll see what they had to say. Plant parasitic nematodes were sampled in June 1999 and 2000 and September of 99 to quantify plant parasitic nematode populations. So we're going to look at that, okay? And you can look at the nematodes they measured. They had lance in here. They had lesion. They had spiral. Did they have sting in here? Root knot. I don't see sting in here, but that's what they measured. And they measured nematodes. Okay, so those are the results. That's the setup. They're looking at a number of different natural organic fertilizers, and they're going to compare them against a non-treated, and they're going to compare them against urea and sulfur-coated urea. They're going to look at this over time on a putting green in Maryland, and they're going to look at quality. They're going to look at disease. They're going to look at microbial activity. They're going to look at nematodes. They're going to look at leaf tissue nitrogen. All these things they're going to look at, and they're going to compare these nitrogen sources to see if any of them had an effect relative to just urea, sulfur-coated urea, and the untreated. Okay? Any questions before we go into the results? Shangri-La Dog. Oh, you know what? I think you were around a long time ago, Shangri-La Dog, because I remember that name. It was fun to say. It's like sassafras. Shangri-La Dog. That's a fun name to say. Are worms good for turfgrass? I'd say they probably are good for turfgrass within reason. And the reason I say that is my lawn right now would probably be an 8, 7.5 or an 8 on the quality scale if it weren't for all the dang moles I have in my yard that are just ripping it all to heck because of all the freaking worms I have out there. There wasn't a mole in sight before I took those dead trees down and seeded my lawn with turfgrass. You couldn't see a mole anywhere. All of a sudden, I seeded my lawn 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was. And there are more moles in my backyard right now than I've ever had, ever. And I usually remove, just depends. I'm going to remove between 2 and 4 moles a year, every year. And this year is the worst I've ever had it. So worms are generally going to be beneficial. They're generally a sign of good, healthy activity in the soil. But with those worms, they attract moles, at least in my case. They attract moles, and I have one mole. It's like, whatever. But I bet I probably have 10 moles in my backyard. They are just destroying my backyard. And I have some traps. I haven't been out there this winter because it's been so cold and frozen, but I'm going to do what I can to keep them under control. But I would say yes. Generally, moles or worms are probably good for your yard and your garden. They're an indicator of good, healthy soil. But if they bring in a bunch of moles, you got sport turf, you got a thoroughbred racetrack, you got moles all over that. You have hundreds of millions of dollars running around that racetrack, and if a horse thinks its hoof is going to land on the grass, and suddenly it's 6 inches lower or 3 inches higher or whatever, and it trips and falls and breaks a leg, you just lost millions of dollars because of a silly freaking mole. Okay, so that's a very real situation. And in my particular case, it's just out of control. Absolutely out of control in my backyard. So I'm okay with worms as long as the turf looks good. In my case, they're affecting it in a negative way. And I don't even really care about my yard. You guys know, the average listeners on my channel know I don't really freaking care. But it's so bad. I'm like, my God, it's just unbelievable. Yeah, so you say worms are soil's natural aerators, they make a mess with castings on fairways when mowing with reels. Yeah. So if you're in sport turf, you're in tee boxes or fairways, and you have so many, you have worm castings everywhere, then they are resulting in a turf performance issue, a quality of the game issue. And in that case, then they're not good. But as far as agronomically to the turf, they usually are considered beneficial. But if they bring on something else like moles or so many castings you can't get rid of them, then it's an issue. Yeah, definitely an issue. Oh, thanks, Ashani. Ashani sent 5 Turfgrass Epistemology memberships. Thanks so much. Brian, can I put these on there? I can't put these on there. No, I can't. Brian Howell, CVO Hobo. CVO Hobo, I remember that name too. I haven't heard that name in a long time. C-Tex, Swantando, and Jepre. You guys are all members. If you're a member, you can go and check out if you're a new member, particularly if you're not used to, you can go and check out the posts in the YouTube posts. And you're going to see posts that were only visible to members. And in there's a Facebook link and for members only. And you can find that link. It's probably a ways down. I haven't reposted it in probably 6 months. But you go way, way down, you're going to see a code for Facebook. And if you would like to join the Facebook group, you can do so by following those instructions and go to the Facebook group and use the code and then ask for permission and give me time to get all the updated stuff in there. But we'll get you in the Facebook group as soon as we can. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Me and my McLean, I don't know. It says I mostly use tea seed meal to kill earthworms and then grub control. Yeah. There is one product that is extremely effective on worms, but it's not labeled for worms. So can't tell you what that is. But there is a product that is extremely useful. Wish I could tell you, but can't have people going out and applying products illegally. Anyway. Oh yeah, and then CBO Hobo says thanks for the membership too, Ashani. Appreciate your help, Ashani, and all the members and subscribers. Okay, let's get into the results. I'm going to show every bit of the results in tables, and then I'm going to discuss the results in the discussion. So now we're at table 1. We're looking at infection center. So this is the disease on creeping bentgrass, area under the disease progress curves for the 9 fertilizers in 1998 and 1999. Okay, and there'll be another table for 2000. So what I've done here, now there's a typo here, and they left out urea at the top of this table. So you'll see a line of data here that doesn't have a treatment title, and that's urea. And then they have sulfur-coated urea. Now I've highlighted sulfur-coated urea and urea as sort of the positive controls. And then that's in orange on all these tables. And I've highlighted the untreated turfgrass in red. So we're going to be comparing the treatment responses to primarily urea and sulfur-coated urea. Okay. And in here, we're looking at, again, the influence of these natural organics on dollar spot by counting the infection centers or the disease under the progress curve, disease area under the disease progress curve. And what you'll find is this Compro, which again, remember, was the composted sludge. This actually resulted in increased dollar spot the entire year of 1998 compared to urea, compared to sulfur-coated urea, and compared to untreated turfgrass. You'll notice that none of the natural organic sources reduced dollar spot compared to urea and sulfur-coated urea or the untreated turf alone. So in other words, the first year, essentially nothing happened beneficially, except Compro increased the disease. Okay, so that's the first year. The second year, the Earth Grow dehydrated manure, which again was, remember, it was a chicken litter it was derived from chicken litter. It resulted in increased disease compared to urea and sulfur-coated urea. You'll see A's here, okay? And I've tried my best to do this correctly. If I missed one, then let me know. But these are all A's I've highlighted in green. And you'll notice urea and sulfur-coated urea are all B's, meaning that the disease was less using urea and sulfur-coated urea than using Earth Grow dehydrated manure in pretty much every date. Now, at the end of the 1998 season, the Compro again resulted in greater disease than the urea and sulfur-coated urea. We're looking at 13 or 29 area of the disease by day, which is, the way they measured this disease was just say 13 and 29 by urea and sulfur-coated urea versus 90 and 87 from Earth Grow and from Compro. But nothing, milorganite didn't have an effect. Sustained medium had no effect. There was no beneficial effect, I should say, from any of the other natural organics relative to just urea and sulfur-coated urea. And in most cases, none of the natural organics had even a beneficial effect relative to untreated turfgrass. Okay? So really, there's nothing beneficial going on from the natural organics in 1998 or in 1999. They're all increasing disease. They're all basically the same, or increasing disease in the case of Compro or Earthgrow dehydrated manure. Now let's go down to 2000. I'm going to go down to the next. I'm going to skip through all this and go down to, where's the, dang it, I thought there was a 2000 one in here. Let me look here. Or is that just quality? Oh, here it is here. So here's 2000. So in sources, but this is in the year 2000. So the same data, it's just the next 2000 in a different table in the year 2000. And now you'll see the name, the treatment name urea here. And again, you'll see urea and sulfur-coated urea resulted in, between 1 and 37 number disease centers per plot, depending on the time of year, the season or the month. And there was nothing that resulted in less disease. As far as I can tell, the only thing that changed was there was an increase in disease from the Compro in every month, including area under the disease progress curve compared to urea, sulfur-coated urea. And looks like even compared to non-treated. So if you had used this Compro, which is a composted sewage sludge, you would have resulted in more disease, not less disease. And if you think you're going to see reduction in disease from using milorganite or sustain or Earthgrow or Ringer Lawn Restore, all these other ones, they didn't find any evidence to support that at all. Absolutely none. As far as disease goes, it's a big strikeout, basically. This disease was there, and natural organics didn't help reduce it. Okay? Now let's go to the quality, which is what really people want to really care about, is the quality. Creeping bentgrass quality in 98 and 99. You'll find that urea, again, these tables are all going to be the same in terms of the color. So these urea and sulfur-coated urea are going to be in orange, and then we have a non-treated turfgrass in red. We have months, May, June, 98, and May, June, July, and 99, all these things, okay? And we're looking at 0 to 10 quality scale. And you'll see, all you got to do when you're looking at quality, particularly like this, where it's so easy to look at, if you want, whatever you want to compare it to, like in this case, the positive control is urea and sulfur-coated urea, you just look through here and you see an A, that means that there's nothing going to be better than that, because A is going to be the highest number in that particular statistical model. And if any lower number would have a B. So if you see an A, there's not going to be anything greater. A. There's a B right here by sulfur-coated urea on May 14th of 1999. So it's possible something might differ there. But then you see A. So in other words, the entire study in 98 and 99 for quality, the only chance of anything being greater than sulfur coat was on May 14th. All the rest of the time, no nitrogen sources resulted in superior turfgrass quality compared to urea and sulfur-coated urea. So, but if we look at this one date, there is a B. So then what you would want to do if you're reading this by yourself, you want to go through and say, well, is there anything that just has an A? Because if it just has an A, then it would be greater than sulfur-coated urea. And you go down through here, and sure enough, you find one right here. Ringer Lawn Restore is a 9.2, and the sulfur coat is an 8.3. And you probably would see that by your naked eye. You'd see a difference in 1 point. So that's biological, probably. Of all the dates in all the nitrogen sources in 98 and 99, nothing resulted in superior turfgrass compared to just straight urea. And then people wonder sometimes, maybe not the hardcore members of this channel, but other peripheral, BS artists wonder sometimes why I say that. Because there's so much evidence in the literature that supports the statement that good quality turfgrass can be grown by using straight urea, and it's really hard to beat it. Every now and then you might find something. But usually, if you put in urea as a positive control and you're wanting your nitrogen product to shine, you are going to be hating life. You don't want to put in urea into a study where you want your nitrogen source to show up and be the greatest source, because you're probably not going to beat urea. It just ain't going to happen. It's very rare. And if you have ammonium sulfate in there, forget it. Ammonium sulfate is almost never beaten. Very rarely is it beaten. And I hear this all the time. I've even heard my name specifically mentioned, saying my name. It's not as good as Dr. Shattuck says it is. Well, it's not me saying this stuff. It's all the literature saying this stuff. So if you want to make that argument, that's fine. I mean, I'm open to any argument. But you're going to have to come with some evidence. You can't just say this stuff, because I'm going to come with 50 articles that show that. Okay? So if you have 50 articles that don't show that, then bring them on and we'll talk about it. But this is why I say this, because you just see this all the time. Okay? Urea is very difficult to beat. And don't even try to beat it on price and price per quality or price per response. It is virtually impossible to beat on that, because it has 46% nitrogen. It's the highest nitrogen source we have in turfgrass science. Okay? At least in any mass level. There's a chelate that has higher than 46. I'm sorry, a stabilized nitrogen source that has a 47, but that's not really used that much. Anyway, so this is the turfgrass quality for 98 and 99. There's nothing really going on here. Urea and sulfur coat are the winners. Now we go to 2000. This is creeping bentgrass quality influenced by 9 nitrogen sources in the year 2000. This is the next session. And you will find on May 12th and May 18th that ComPro was superior right here. Then for urea and sulfur coated urea. So these two dates, it was superior. But look what happens on the very next month, the very next week. May 18th to May 25th, they flip. And now ComPro is the worst, and urea and sulfur coated are the best. And then ComPro is the worst the next rating date, and the next 2 out of the next 3 rating dates, ComPro is worse than urea and sulfur coated urea. So this is what I mean. When I say every now and then you might find one blip on a radar where you might have one strange thing happen, and one product might find, you might find a superior turfgrass compared to urea or sulfur coated urea. Maybe every now and then. But most of the time, meaning 95% of the time or more, you are going to have extremely good-looking turfgrass by using urea, sulfur-coated urea, or ammonium sulfate, just a standard nitrogen source if applied correctly, compared to all these other nitrogen sources. And you're going to do it for the least amount of money. I don't care what you throw at me. Amino acids. You want to throw stabilized nitrogen sources. You want to throw polymer-coated sources. You want to throw whatever you're going to throw at me. You might find, like I said, right here, you might find one blip. Maybe. But I'm going to show you 10 or 15 blips that show the exact opposite, like right here, May 25th, June 2nd, June 16th, June 23rd. All of these dates, May 26th, 98, and all these dates are the opposite. So, you know, if you happen to have one particular location when you go, you know what, I get it, Shaddocks, I know what you're saying, but on my location, I've done this and I've tested it, and you know, I just don't see that as a response. Okay, so be it. You might be 1 out of a million. You might be that one location. But if you're a betting man, urea, ammonium sulfate, and sulfur-coated urea should be your staples when it comes to nitrogen applications. If you're looking for the best quality turf for the least amount of money, or just the best quality turf, full stop, those are going to be your foundational products. And like I said, it just comes from all of this literature that I've read for ages and ages. I haven't read this particular paper, it's on diseases, but all the nutrient literature says the same dang thing. Now let's go to, did I miss any table? No, these are all quality and diseases. Okay, went through quality and diseases. Now let's get to thatch depth and soil organic matter. So that's the other thing you'll see a lot. These natural organics are going to break down thatch. I heard this, I don't know how many times. We're going to put this in, it's going to break down thatch. Okay, well, there indeed is a little bit on this particular study where you have thatch in 2000. I think they only measured thatch once. And you'll see thatch depth, millimeters, okay? Urea and sulfur-coated urea were 25 millimeters in thatch depth, okay? 25, all right? The untreated was 18. Now, the Earth Grow 1881 Select was 22, resulting in less thatch, and the Scott's All Natural Turf Builder was 21. We're talking about 25 millimeters to 22 millimeters, and they're showing that's a statistical reduction. Okay, fine, it's a statistical reduction. Are you really going to be able to biologically determine that that's meaningful? The difference of 3 millimeters in thatch depth? I'm not going to argue the statistics. They show the statistics. That's fine. I would just argue that biologically, I don't know if I'd hang my hat on that. Because the opposite, you'll see where there is actually an increase, millorgonite and sustain increased thatch, earthgrow increased thatch, and compro increased thatch by anywhere between 7-8 millimeters to 2 or 3 millimeters. And I still wouldn't say that millorgonite's going to increase thatch when it goes from 25 millimeters to 26 millimeters. No one's ever going to be able to see that. It's never going to have a meaningful effect on your turf. So I wouldn't hang my hat on that either, showing that it's an increase. What I would say is probably not a whole lot going on right now with thatch. It's, 25 millimeters plus or minus 2 or 3 millimeters is, I think, well within the realm of variation. Okay. There's some of them increased it, some of them decreased it. I would say they're all biologically irrelevant. Now we're going to look at organic matter in the top 1 inch, and you're going to see that organic matter in the top 1 inch from urea and sulfur-coated urea were around 3% in November, around 4.3 and 4.9% in March, and then 3% in June. And you're going to see that organic matter did increase a little bit in using the sustain medium in a couple of months. The millorgonite resulted in increased organic matter in June from 3% down to up to 4%. And then there was an increase by Compro in March 1st from 4% to 8%. Now they're going to explain this 8%. That's not real. Okay. They're going to explain how that happened. Plant parasitic nematodes. I hear that a lot too. Natural organics are going to reduce nematodes. They're going to reduce nematodes. That didn't happen. Okay. There was nothing different from urea and sulfur-coated urea, except the Compro resulted in increased nematodes on September 7th of 99. That actually resulted in increased nematodes. All the rest of them are basically the same. There was one little blip here where there was an increase from earthgrow compared to sulfur-coated urea, but I'm just going to let that slide. And same thing here, but there was an increase with millorgonite compared to sulfur-coated urea in June 28th of 2000. There was a little bit of an increase there. But the point is, some of them actually resulted in an increase. Some of them resulted in no change at all. I would just call it a wash and say, for the most part, nothing happened. Okay. Even if there was an increase, I wouldn't go to war over that and say, don't use them because there was an increase. I would just say that nematodes are so variable. I would want to see more results, but regardless, nematodes did not go down. Let's just say that. There's no evidence that nematodes went down, okay? There's no reduction in nematodes anywhere on this list. So these didn't have any effect on the reduction in nematodes. Let's look at tissue nitrogen levels. You're going to see a whole lot of reductions on tissue nitrogen levels. And again, this might look like, oh, well, Shaddix is showing that these actually reduce nitrogen levels in the tissue, and this is horrible. I wouldn't say that. Okay, there's no increases in tissue nitrogen levels anywhere. You can go through here and it says A. All these are A's basically. Urea and ammonia and sulfur-coated urea are all A's. So nothing's resulting in more nitrogen in the tissue. But tissue nitrogen concentrations and just nutrient concentrations in general need to be read very carefully, because a reduction in nitrogen in the tissue does not necessarily mean a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a problem. For example, at certain times of the year in certain plants, you might actually, when you're fertilizing it and it's growing a lot, you might actually see the tissue nitrogen concentration may have gone down compared to the prior month when it wasn't growing as much. What generally is the thought process is when it's growing and the cells are elongating and they're dividing rapidly, plant growth is occurring rapidly, that might actually result in a dilution of nitrogen in the plant tissue. Whereas when the plant slows down, like in the case of phosphorus deficiency, and the tissue slows down, the cell division elongation slows down, you might actually increase the concentration of nitrogen. It's just a matter of volume, okay? So I wouldn't really hang my hat a whole lot on, look at all these natural organics and they're reducing nitrogen in the tissue. That might be a good story to tell if you want to argue against the use of natural organics. There's a lot of arguments to be made against the use of natural organics. And you can look on this sheet and there's just yellow all over this table, guys. If you're listening to this on a podcast, you might want to go on YouTube and watch this. This is open to the public. There is no nitrogen source that resulted in more nitrogen in the tissue than urea and sulfur-coated urea. But I just wouldn't hang my hat on that a whole lot. Okay. There's just there's many confounding factors that are not controlled for in this particular table. So you have to be careful how you read tissue nutrient concentrations. Now, I know salesmen, particularly scam artists and con men in South Florida, love tissue nutrient concentration tests because of that. They don't understand how to read it correctly. They don't understand the confounding factors, but what they do understand is if they show a reduction in tissue nutrient concentration, that might convince a superintendent to go out and apply more fertilizer. Okay, so there may be a need to apply more fertilizer, but there may not be a need to apply more fertilizer. It may just be a simple compression issue or an increase in the concentration because the plant is reduced due to some other confounding factor. Okay, so I'd be real careful about this. This looks like, like I said, I'd just be careful about reading nutrient concentration. Even though these are showing reductions, I wouldn't really go too far down that road. General soil microbial activity levels, measuring the fluorescent diacetate. So this is microbial activity by indirectly measuring a chemical in the soil. And you'll see urea and sulfur-coated urea here are at the top again, and untreated is at the bottom. And so in this particular sense, you're wanting to see, or the natural organic fertilizer salesmen, like many of the con men that I've gone over in this channel, they're going to want to see numbers here that show that there's more microbial activity because they sell their natural organic fertilizers and all their miracle natural products on this feed the soil mentality and increasing soil microbial activity. Well, in this study, for the most part, nothing happened compared to urea and sulfur-coated urea. There were 2 dates, July 15th and June 28th, where Compro on June 28th resulted in more microbial activity than urea and sulfur-coated urea. And on July 15th, the EarthGrow dehydrated manure and the Ringer Lawn Restore resulted in greater microbial activity than the urea and sulfur-coated urea. So there were a couple dates, but from a couple products. But there were more dates where these products actually reduced microbial activity. Ringer Lawn Restore and Scott's Natural Organic Turf Builder reduced microbial activity on June 11th. These reduced microbial activity on May 25th of 2000 and June 7th of 2000. You'll see all these are resulting in reductions in microbial activity. Whereas all the other dates and all the other products, nothing changed compared to urea and sulfur-coated urea. And this is what I've said. When you're comparing natural organics, and this is what oftentimes they'll do, they'll say, well, this product is resulted in greater microbial activity compared to non-treated turf grass. No, that's the wrong question. Who's doing that? And even in that case, many of these cases, it's the same as non-treated turf grass. The question is, what happens when urea is applied, sulfur-coated urea is applied? Because that's encouraging the plant to grow. That's encouraging more roots. That's encouraging more root exudates. More root exudates encourage more microbial activity, right? More microbial activity just primes the system just from urea and sulfur-coated urea alone. So you need to compare your natural organic miracle product to those, to a positive control, not a negative control. And when we do that, we see basically nothing happening. Sometimes it was better, most of the time nothing happened, and sometimes it was worse. Okay, let's get to the discussion if I can get through this. Ringer Lawn Restore and sulfur-coated urea generally provided the most consistent level of higher quality when Dollar Spot was active. Urea, Milorganite, Scott's, Sustain, EarthGrow generally provided an intermediate level of turf quality. The lowest turf quality in all years was observed in plots treated with EarthGrow, Compro, and unfertilized turf. I'm going to have to read the highlights here because I'm running out of time. The error in the disease progress curve values showed that none of the nitrogen sources reduced Dollar Spot over the season. Ringer Lawn Restore, urea, Milorganite, and Sustain, and sulfur-coated urea delayed Dollar Spot to within the acceptable thresholds in May and early to mid-June, when disease pressure was in the low to moderate range. Conversely, Compro, all 3 years, and EarthGrow, 99, had intensified Dollar Spot. The mechanism of this enhancement is unknown. None of the treatments reduced Dollar Spot significantly when disease pressure became moderately severe in 1998 or 99. Okay? General soil microbial activity and tissue nitrogen levels were quantified in 99 and 2000. No nitrogen source consistently was associated with higher levels of soil microbial activity when compared with unfertilized plots. Okay, there was no correlation between general soil microbial activity in 99 and 2000. However, Dollar Spot was correlated negatively with soil microbial activity on the first rating date when disease pressure was low. Hence, These results do not strongly support the premise that natural organic fertilizers suppress dollar spot by enhancing soil microbial activity, as suggested by Lewin 95. All right. Oh, it's going to go here. Okay. It appears that nitrogen availability was the major factor in reducing dollar spot severity early in the season, rather than the natural organic component. Just the nitrogen alone is doing it. Okay. The larger increase in organic matter by early 2000 likely was due to the core aeration performed prior to the autumn 99. Remember that one product had an 8% organic matter, right? Compared to the urea and sulfur-coated urea. And they're saying that is probably due to the aerification. Aerification allowed the nitrogen source to more effectively penetrate the upper 1 inch of soil. Improved aeration provided by coring combined with the facilitated entry of nutrients into the aeration channels probably promoted an increase in root biomass. The highest organic matter levels were found in the upper 1 inch of Compro treated plots in March of 2000. The high organic matter levels in Compro treated plots likely was due to the collection of samples from some aerification holes containing large amounts of Compro. In other words, they aerified the soil and then they put the products on and then they went back and sampled it. And there's probably just a big chunk of organic material in this sampling because they hit a core. They had an aerification core and happened to have a bunch in it. Not necessarily, the product didn't necessarily result in higher organic matter. It's just the sampling procedure was probably flawed because they hit an aerification hole. None of the nitrogen sources reduced thatch when compared with unfertilized plots. Compro, however, increased thatch. Unbelievable, you know? Just crazy. I mean, you think it's going to increase that or decrease thatch and decrease nematodes and decrease the dollar spot and all these other things. The question I've had is, for anything, how do you know? Because if you got the information from a salesman, I'd be real careful with that. I'd be real careful with that. If you got the information from somebody down the road, that's an anecdotal observation. I'd be careful with that. Okay, even if you got it from yourself, from seeing it yourself, I'd even be careful with that. You have to be able to know what you're looking for and how to measure this correctly in order to have actual confidence in these results. And before you go, betting the farm that this is actually going to have a beneficial impact. Natural organic nitrogen sources and soil amendments are believed to suppress plant parasitic nematodes. The population density of parasitic nematodes recovered from fertilized plots generally were similar to populations recovered from unfertilized plots. Compro treated plots on one rating date in 99, however, had the highest parasitic nematode plots or population densities that then were found in the unfertilized plot, just like I mentioned. Okay, and then conclusions. Ringer Lawn Restore, was consistently associated with reduced dollar spot when disease pressure was low to moderately severe, and provided good turf quality. None of the natural organic products evaluated, however, consistently reduced dollar spot when compared with the synthetic organic nitrogen sources. The suppression of dollar spot early in the season was associated more with nitrogen availability rather than enhanced microbial activity. Results also showed that the natural organic fertilizer did not reduce thatch or population densities of plant parasitic nematodes when compared with synthetic nitrogen sources. Conversely, Compro increased dollar spot thatch depth and on one rating date was associated with elevated levels of plant parasitic nematodes. Sustain was the most consistent nitrogen source shown to increase organic matter levels in the upper 1 inch, but no nitrogen source increased organic matter in the 1 to 2 inch range. And I know sometimes it's hard to hear this. If you're a superintendent, you've been doing this for years. It's real easy to dismiss this. No, I've been doing it for years. I don't believe that. It's different on my course. That's special pleading, right? My course is completely different than everything else. Well, it may be very different than everything else. You may have that one location out of a million that is unique, and you have unique situations and settings, and you have to deal with things differently. These studies we're trying our best to replicate and simulate what's going to happen on a golf course and how this, and so that these data and these results can be used to predict what's going to happen in reality. Doesn't mean it's always going to happen in reality. It just means that if you're a betting person, I'd rather err on the side of evidence, even if it's slightly different than my particular setting. If I don't have anything in my setting, or if I'm relying upon bad information or bad reasons to do what I do, Well, this evidence is in Maryland. I'm over in New Jersey. It's not exactly the same, but I don't have any evidence in New Jersey. So I'm going to rely upon this, at least start with this, and then make adjustments for good reasons accordingly from that point forward, rather than buy into all this stuff and then have to go back and cull it out. Just start from nothing and then add in things that have evidence rather than the other way around. It's probably a more efficient way to go. But I can understand it's really easy to just dismiss this. Oh, it's crazy. That doesn't count. I do it all the time when I see these responses. I don't care what Travis says. It's, what I see on my course is completely different. And I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. Well, okay. You might be different. Your course might be different. This might not be relevant. But majority of cases in the literature are going to show what I just showed. Natural organic sources produce perfectly good looking turfgrass the majority of the time. Reducing dollar spot, reducing nematodes, increasing microbial activity, that's a whole other thing. Reducing thatch, oh, hold on. Urea and sulfur-coated urea are going to do a lot of that for you. They're going to increase quality. They're going to increase microbial activity. They're going to increase that just simply because it's the gas pedal on the engine of carbon pumping into the system, the gas pedal of the turf. They're slamming down the gas pedal. The turfgrass is growing like crazy. It's really pumping a lot of carbon and building roots and building leaves. That alone is going to do a lot of the work for you, a lot of the heavy lifting. Okay. Any questions? Joe Callan knows how to make me smile. No need for any organics. What you need is Carbon Pro G biochar to really add in carbon to help retain water. Plus, you're feeding the microbes. I get that all the time. Get that from all the guys at Earthworks. We've got to feed the soil. We've got to feed the microbes. We're after soil. What do they call it? Soil. I don't know what they call it. That's some phrase they use. Soil microbial health or something. I forget what they use over there. And I'm sure those products probably do result in that. But the point is that it's most likely just from the nitrogen alone, as this paper stated more than once. It's probably just a function of the nitrogen, because you see it from urea as well as sulfur-coated urea, as well as from some of the natural organics. You see it from all of them. So if you see it from all of them, and some of them are just synthetic nitrogen sources like urea, and they're the least expensive, then why not consider those first before you start going on all these other roads? Okay, I'm gonna switch it over and close it out. You're either going to like this lady or you're not going to like them. There's no in between. I'm just letting you know. You're either going to like her or you're going to shut it right off, okay? I really believe this time next year we're going to be sitting around and she's probably going to be at the Grammys, or a lot of people are going to know this lady's name. Wish you guys the best of luck in all your endeavors. I'll be back next Monday. Have a great week. Thank you much for your support, members. Thank you much, Shawnee, for your donations of the memberships this evening. I really appreciate it a lot. I'll see you guys next Monday. Have a great week. Bye.